So today I would like to present some data, some informations about the period in the development of the wheeled transport, which we can actually call probably the middle period of the development of the wheeled transport in Eurasian steppe. And basically, I avoided here to use the terms of like early Bronze Age or middle Bronze Age because actually this phenomena that I'm going to talk about, and they were connected to like also the periods of the turnings of this periods of the Bronze Age. So I decided to use this term. And I'm mostly going to speak about today about the wagons and other wheeled transport phenomena of the Jamna, Nowotitarovka, and catacomb culture. And mostly because they're very comparable and at least partially chronologically we can synchronize this phenomena at least partially by chronology, and sometimes they're also very in chronological proximity of each other. And this period is actually characterized by a very significant diversity of the wheeled transport. We can like separate probably the biggest amount of the types of the wagons and carts during the history of this development. But on the other hand, so we see also many differences in the way the wagons and wheeled transport was in general treated in the burial rite. Which is probably connected to the fact that wheeled transport was already established on this area. And these changes I'm going to talk about, I also excluded pretty consciously the phenomena connected to the chariots, the chariot complex from the late 3rd century, from the late 3rd millennia, because the changes I'm going to talk about, the diversity I'm going to talk about, wasn't like so much connected to the turning worldview. And this time they were possibly smaller, but with a great significance for the further development. So this is the map of the maybe early phase of this phenomena. I included there all the Yamnaya findings, although those of them are a little bit earlier, but this tradition and the way they were treated, we can see the continuity in the later Yamnaya phase, maybe excluding the Urals area when there was slightly different, there was more imitations on the very far east. And Nowotitarovka territory is here in the Azov area, with 3 blue dots. And basically what I want to emphasize there is the fact that we see some areas of the concentration of these findings, like specific zone, as you may see here, but also I need to admit there that it wasn't only the areas of concentration on specific zones, but also on the specific sites. And same rules basically probably visible for the catacomb times. Okay, so at first I would like to describe the four-wheel wagons. Four-wheel wagons, which we could probably already call the kibitka type. Kibitka obviously should be like it's a four-wheel wagon that has some specific cover, some roof, which we not always are able to find in these materials. But all of these wagons are characterized by they were just very easily adjustable to the conditions, to the needs of the people, because most of them could be easily dismantled and adjusted. So I think this is the reason why not in all of the grays we can find something like a roof. They're characterized by a very light upper body construction. And what is very important there is the fact that they were treated completely different by any of this community that I mentioned. And this has probably a very big impact on the interpretation. Here I placed a picture of the typical Yamnaya grave. For Yamnaya, it's characteristic that they placed the wheels like inside of the grave or on the upper level of the grave, and they were some kind of imitation of the wagon. And we can almost never find them in like as a whole object. Wheels were always dismounted, and there was always missing some piece. They were quite small, and from the wagon body you can mostly find the lower level, the frame, and by the wheels there were only disc wheeled in use. Sometimes they were made from one piece, sometimes they were made from already three pieces. They're chronologically very close. And usually I wrote there like the typical size, but I need to admit that they were mostly on this minimum level on the scale. These big words are way more rare, and they were like 2 or 3 wagons per side. I basically counted there almost all of the wagons of Yamnaya that I could describe, 48. Because we see no trace of other type of wagon that could be characteristic for this community. Among the Novotitorovka wagon, I had only a database of 8, sadly, but I just had no access to the further data. I know they're very popular type of the inventory of the Novotitorovka grave. But on the other hand, I think these 8 graves that I had in my database, they are very good to present how they look like. They were much bigger and much more detailed, mostly because they were placed on the surface above the grave, as you can see on this picture in the profile. And they were very rarely dismantled. They were just put there as a whole object. And as we see, the wagon body was bigger. It was way more detailed. We see sometimes they had like a few layers of this frame that made the lower level of the wagon body. We see also a lot of traces of the upper body. As I said, they were very light. Some plate work, some other types of fabrics. And what is also important, in some of these wagons, we can see that there was specific place for the driver. So the driver was definitely on the sitting position. And also we can see some areas of the concentrations. And for catacomb wagons, they were very, very diverse, a little bit smaller than the ones that I just presented. And the wheels were also a little bit smaller. And as I said, there was quite a visible diversity among them. Because sometimes we see this upper body was also treated as in Yamnaya, sometimes as in Novotitorovka, sometimes they're also placed as a just whole object, but for example, without this upper levels of an upper body. And they are so much differ in the size. And I will show just now how diverse they were, because there were definitely not only some type of kibitka, but also some wagons that we could probably call the wagons of the ritual purpose. The upper wagon I presented here is has basically no analogies with other findings. It was in a Roman grave. There's also some very interesting other types of inventory, some substances, some amulets, and this kind of things. But what is important about the construction of this wagon is the fact that it has a very unusual proportions. Basically, I can say it was just wider than longer, with very small upper body, like around 1 meter wide. And the axes weren't like fully parallel, because the front axe was a little bit shorter, but overall they also use the same technique. We also use another traces of the ritual usage, typical ritual usage of the wagons, which is the traces of the placement of the wagons that were possibly later taken from the grave, as here on the lower picture, as in Donskoy, there's just rows, parallel rows, that were left from the wheels of the wagon. For the catacomb community, there is a characteristic, another type, which is very important for the further development, of course, which is two-wheeled wagon. So far, for now, I only could gather the 5 fundings of this type. And between these 5 fundings, 3 of them were pretty described in detail in the source. So at least on this basis, I could separate 2 types. And the difference between these 2 types, the basic difference, is the fact that the first type was open on the front, which is also connected to the fact that the driver was probably in the sitting position while driving. And the second type was open on the back, and this is something completely new. On this picture, I presented the first type, which is represented by this card from Wojkowo. There's a lot of details. Also, these wheels are very interesting, considering the fact that they have some specific holes in the disc, which is also more typical for the catacomb time. So basically, about the second type, which was open on the back, as I said, it's also characterized by the fact that the covers were from all of the three sides. Like, it was covered there, but open on the back. And what is very significant there is the fact that it looks a little bit like the chariots of the chariot complex, but the main difference is in the fact that they were still pulled by oxen or bulls. We don't have any evidence for the horses, of course, used in transport at this point of time, and they still had a heavy and disc wheels. There was no spoked wheel at this point of time, and I need to admit that there's very high probability that the two-wheeled wagons, especially this type of wagon, the two-wheeled carts, were already in usage around half of the 3rd millennium. And very important is also the fact that there were these 5 fundings actually come from all of the catacomb territory. So they were probably in much more broad usage, but we just don't have a better proof for this. They weren't just as popular for the burial rite as in other types. There's also a pretty well-known example from Tiaunua from Zaporizhia area, same type as Ipatovo probably, and they come from very pretty distant places. So there is also this is a very broad topic actually, but there's of course also the question, not only the constructional question of the way they were usage, but also what was actually found in the same context with these wagons in the same grave, which is probably connected to, of course, the role of the deceased person as well, and maybe even the role of the wagons, the area of usage of the wagon. I decided to still compare this to Nowotytarówka because already I described it. So even though I don't have much data of it, I was mostly interested in my own research, like PhD research in the weaponry. And for the Yamna, there was these Yamna graves were characterized by some presence of the weapons, but these weapons weren't very specific. By this I mean that this type of weapons like daggers or arrowheads, they can be also used as tools. They were made from daggers, especially. They were made from metal, so this might have some significance, but we cannot fully connect it to some, let's say, warrior equipment. They weren't found in Nowotytarówka graves, at least these few graves, but within catacomb times there is some interesting trait, because this looks like this amount is similar, but there's a little bit of difference, especially that we have the first axis placed with in the same context as wagons, and also like in Yamnaya, for example, this was only the singular finds in this case, but in catacomb times they were already placed in a sets, so we see a slight difference. The problem is, and I had this problem in my research, is the fact that we don't see any wagon or any card of the type that have any like traits that could be useful, constructional traits that could be useful in the battlefield with weapons. They were all with the full like kibitka type of wagon, or in the graves where only the wheels were found. So we don't know what type of wagon was placed there. We just see some changes in both, but it's not fully visible. The next category is tools, which were very popular among any of these periods, and it's probably just connected to the economical role of the deceased person that they were buried with. And with catacomb is also very, very interesting, because in many cases there was like typical so-called pastoral set of awl and dagger. Of course, ornaments were very popular. Vessels, also vessels made of wood, which could be like differences between. There were some animal bones and, of course, pigments. And I was also trying to find, of course, some analogies to see where these types of wagons come from, which was the inspiration, like the source of this first idea. And I was obviously looking on the Middle East, where there's probably the first wood transport ever emerged. But we see a lot of representations in the small art, the clay models, some depictions. But the problem is there were few wagons of this type of kibitka type found, as for example clay models in the Middle East. But the problem is there was only the few of them. And when I was looking at the sources of the authors who collected them, they were mostly giving as analogy my findings from the steppe area. So I was a bit like in circular. And the most of the Middle Eastern four-wheel wagons, they were actually so-called battle carts. There's an example from Hafaj from Iraq, but of course they are also depicted like in the standard of war, etc. These wagons are characterized by the very low side covers and very tight front cover. They were mostly depicted with some warriors and weapons on the standing on the body. So this is a bit different. Like we don't see this type of wagons on the Eurasian steppe. And in the same time, we see some spread of this tradition. We can only assume this was, let's say, kibitka type of wagon in this lower picture. We see the spread of this tradition because, for example, in Moravian Codex were graves, some traces of the placement of the wagons of wheels were found. And I think this is like fully like Yamnaya Katakombaya tradition spread to more west area. So I guess maybe the type of the wagon is also very, very similar. And the second analogy is, as I said, there was high probability that the driver was in a very specific sitting position, which is depicted on the, for example, the stela of Okuniev culture from Khakassia. On this very side is a very small picture of the wagons, also with arch roof. On the other picture, I placed the wagon that's probably connected to late Yamnaya or maybe early Katakombaya culture, which is also very rare that the deceased person here is left in the sitting position of the body of the wagon. Of course, the body isn't preserved, but we can assume it was there. This wagon doesn't seem to be dismantled. This pose of the deceased person can be found in this period in this area. This is the Caucasus area, in the graves. But the important fact is that this person was probably actually a driver. There was a lot of anthropological research made on his skeleton, and we see that first the way he was built leads to this conclusion. And another thing is the fact that he was actually the survivor of some kind of, I don't know how to describe this, but it was some kind of communicational accident he took part in. He had the same once structure on his body that later healed as today's people who took part in some kind of car accident. So we can assume this is like the oldest evidence for this kind of thing to happen. There's also a big question of the two-wheel vehicles, because the two-wheel vehicles were definitely used first, a little bit earlier actually, on the Middle East, already in like first half of the third millennia, but they have a little bit of different type. Because as I said, the steppe area had the wagons, has the carts that were covered on the sides and from the front. And here we see the two-wheeled carts that were actually a smaller version of the Middle Eastern four-wheeled cart, which means they were also covered mostly on the front with this high front cover, but not on the side. And they looked almost same in every picture I saw. There's also an interesting question about other analogies, because I presented there some findings from India, from Sinauli, that are a little bit younger. At the same time, they look like they were more covered, but the difference is also the fact that the metal used. And we almost never see the usage of the metal parts of the on the wagons or carts. Definitely not on this period, sometimes within chariots. So this is like a good question of the spread of specific types. And another, this is not like fully analogy, because this finding is much, much younger than what I'm describing here. But we see some kind of the tries to, some combination with the construction on the, especially catacomb wheels. This was still the time when the heavy three-part wheels were in usage, but they already started to develop something about the constructions. They made some holes in the disc that we see also like in the further development of the wheels of the Bronze Age in more Western areas. There's also some findings like this, and this is also a good question if this was like a first try to make this construction be lighter and later led to some kind of development of spoke wheels, or this was just to make the construction stronger and maybe there were just some leather stripes pass by this. But to be honest, I never seen any case of the actual usage of these holes to put there some stripes, etc., to make this whole construction stronger. So an open question. So as a conclusion, on the end, I would like to say that we see a very strong diversity of the types of this period, probably the strongest diversity we see in the wagons in the burial ever in the Bronze Age. And we can also say that this all changes were very significant for the further development, but also connected to the fact that wagons were already established and very present in the burial rite. And also in many zones of the everyday life, we see that they were definitely used in like any economical activity. For her, there's like the half nomadic societies of this time, but also clearly just for ritual purpose. And of course, the open question is still the usage in warfare, because we have some evidence, but this is not very clear, and which types and this kind of thing. And there's my literature I used for the radiocarbon dates and pictures I used. Dziękuję za uwagę.
Ainult na rozumію Україну, можете проводити.
Мені зробили добре.
Будь ласка, на всьому просторі, де поширені місця знахідок возів поховання, наскільки поширеним явищем є заглибини в землі сліди від возів під курганом?
Practice of this.
In English? Okej, to spróbuję. Jakby coś było niezrozumiałe, to proszę dodać. Generalnie nie znalazłam ich aż tak dużo. One, jeżeli chodzi o te ślady, które tutaj zaprezentowałam, one są raczej albo na samych grobach, na przykład w szybach, w przypadku kultury katakumbowej, tak jak tutaj pokazałam. Jeżeli chodzi na przykład o kulturę nowotytarowską, tam było tych śladów więcej. Tam była generalnie też taka sytuacja, że widzimy czasami, że były przygotowane takie jamki na złożenie tego wozu, ale z jakiegoś powodu one były złożone troszeczkę dalej albo niezbyt równo, więc jakby przygotowywano to miejsce. Najpierw być może to była taka sama sytuacja, a następnie dopiero podjeżdżano. No i takie pytanie też, jak często te wozy w ogóle zabierano z tego miejsca. Więc to nie jest aż taka popularna praktyka.
Я мав на увазі навіть заглиблені могили, а заглиблення під насипом кургану.
Tak. Temat właśnie nowotytarowski na tej powierzchni. Tak.
What is the
Ostatnim. On this complex with the traces on the surface. Ostatni. Levity, also the complex of the wagon graves of the Nowotytarowka community, and they're mostly observed there.
Я можу доповнити. Наскільки я пам'ятаю, так розповідачам на лісних під курганом є колія від голову. І вони намагалися під одним із так само вони зафіксували, причому там ледь не перехрестя. Тобто вони прямо на перехрестя посадили кургани. Так і так. Ні, здається, Росія не пошкодила.
Боротися.
Макін теж зафіксував у довгій могилі теж піймав. І все це пізно. Бронзовий. Ну так у всіх випадках пізно бронзовий.
Там принесли.
a question about the usage of these vehicles in warfare. It's possible that this stage, these people didn't have this differentiation for like military transport and the civil transport, that it was used for both simple movements and during battles. Is it possible?
I think it's possible, especially that that from my perspective, I also researched the later chariots. This idea of the actually chariot usage must come from someplace, and I think it's local. But in the same time, we don't see this very strongly in the previous period. So I think it's fully possible that this differentiation only started now.